Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. It was a foggy evening in a small riverside village. The mist moved slowly, like an old hymn hummed beneath your breath. Everything was hushed not by fear, but by reverence. As if creation itself had decided to whisper. An old man named Thomas stood at his window, cupping a warm mug of tea with his trembling hands. He had lived many years, buried his parents, watched friends leave this earth, and now most days, he simply watched the river drift by, wondering what it all meant. He used to search for answers in books, in sermons, in long conversations that stretched past midnight. But now, his questions had grown softer, not gone, just quieter. Like birds that sing further off in the woods. On that foggy night, Thomas felt something stir deep inside. Not a thought, not a fear, just a longing. Not to understand, but to be held. He reached for the old Bible beside his chair. Its pages were worn, thin at the corners, marked by years of weeping and waiting. And there it was. The same verse he had read 1,000 times. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. The words did not answer his questions, but somehow they calmed them. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence, to the river, to the God who speaks in stillness. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. You are not alone in the fog. God is near, and He understands. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Psalm 23:2-3. The next morning came quietly, as if it tiptoed into the day. The fog had lifted, but the sky remained overcast, washed in pale grays and soft blues. Thomas, as he did most mornings, walked down the gentle slope behind his cottage to the river's edge. There was a wooden bench there, old and worn, tucked beneath the outstretched limbs of a willow tree. No one knew who had placed it there. It had simply always been a place for sitting, for listening, for remembering. Thomas sat slowly, groaning softly as his knees bent and his spine settled. The river whispered its slow, eternal song beside him. He looked out over the waters and exhaled, long and slow. He didn't need to talk. He didn't need to solve anything. He just needed to sit in the presence of the one who knew him completely. Some mornings, Thomas would pray. Some mornings, he would hum a hymn. But today, he did neither. He simply watched the river move. And somehow, the movement of the water began to soften something in him. His thoughts, often tangled like branches in a storm, began to float downstream, loosened by the gentle current. He thought about Mary, his late wife, the way she would laugh with her whole body, the way she'd hum while folding towels, the way she whispered his name when she was close to leaving. He thought about the years they shared, the garden she loved, the children who moved away, the long, ordinary days that became holy only in hindsight. He smiled, not from happiness, not from grief, but from gratitude. And then he whispered something so quiet, even the river barely heard. Thank you. That was all. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the river. Thank you for the stillness. And deep within him, he sensed the still, small voice reply, "You're welcome, child. I've been here all along. Take a deep breath. Let the waters of peace wash over you." Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to rush. God walks slowly, and He walks with you. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:4-5. The willow above Thomas began to sway ever so slightly, though the morning air was still. A breeze, soft as breath, stirred the long green tendrils above his head. And just then, the clouds parted, not all the way, but enough. A sliver of golden light fell gently through the branches, landing across his lap like a shawl. He looked down and smiled. Light, he thought, always finds a way through. There had been long winters in his life, seasons when he could hardly see anything ahead. Days when the ache of loss pressed against his chest like a heavy coat, making it hard to even rise from bed. But light always found him. Not suddenly, not with blinding force, but gradually like this, like a quiet sunbeam slipping through the trees, reaching him just enough to warm his hands. Thomas reached down to the soft earth beneath the bench. The grass was damp from the river mist, but the soil underneath was firm. He traced his fingers through it gently, like a child playing in the dirt again. He thought of the garden Mary once kept, of the tomatoes she planted, the way she whispered to her basil, the way she thanked God even for worms. He closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "I think I'm starting to see again. Not everything, just little things. The way the light moves, the feel of the ground, the rhythm of breath." He paused and let his hand rest still in the grass. That's enough, isn't it? He didn't need to explain everything anymore. He didn't need to understand why some prayers had gone unanswered, or why some people seemed to drift away when he needed them most. He just needed to sit in the light, to feel it brush across his knees, to know it came from above, to remember that even when the world feels gray, Jesus still shines. Not always with noise, not always with answers, but always with love. The kind of love that seeps quietly into old bones, the kind that doesn't demand anything back. Take a deep breath. Let the light rest on your soul. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to see clearly to be loved completely. The light is already reaching for you, even now. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk 2:20. There was a chapel just a short walk from Thomas's cottage. Stone walls, weathered with age. A wooden door that creaked gently when opened. And above it, a single cross that had watched 1,000 sunsets. Thomas hadn't been inside for a while. Not because he didn't believe, but because his faith had become quieter, less about answers, more about presence. But on this particular afternoon, after the bench, after the river, after the light, his feet seemed to find their way up the little hill without thinking. No one was inside. Just the soft smell of old wood and the gentle hush that lives in sacred places. He walked down the aisle, slower than he once did, and sat in the third pew. That was Mary's favorite. She used to whisper prayers there, hands folded like petals, even when her voice could no longer rise above a whisper. Thomas folded his hands too, not because he had something to say, but because silence felt holy. He sat in the stillness, the kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt full of memory, full of mercy, full of God. He looked at the cross above the altar. It was simple, wooden, not ornate, but it held the story of a God who came close, a God who entered silence, who sat at tables, who walked dusty roads, who wept. And Thomas thought maybe this was faith after all. not having everything bright and cheerful, but trusting that even in the dim, even in the hush, he is here. He remembered the story of Elijah, how the prophet searched for God in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire. But God was not there. And then a still small voice. Yes, that was it. A presence that does not shout, but stays. Take a deep breath. Let the hush of the chapel wash over you. Bedtime takeaway. God does not need noise to be near. In the silence, he is closer than breath. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. Psalm 63:5. The chapel had been still, full of sacred silence. But now, back in his little kitchen, Thomas found a different kind of holiness, a warmth. Not the warmth of fire, though the kettle was simmering softly on the stove, but the warmth of the everyday, of wooden spoons and chipped mugs and windows that steamed gently when the pot boiled. He shuffled to the counter and placed 2 tea bags into an old ceramic teapot, one for himself and one for Mary. He still brewed 2 cups, not out of grief anymore, but out of rhythm. Some habits are too tender to break. As the tea steeped, he reached for a note card tucked beneath a magnet on the refrigerator. It was stained with years of kitchen use, but the words were still legible. It was Mary's handwriting, Psalm 63. She had written it years ago when her memory began to fade, when words no longer came easily in conversation, but scripture still found its way to her lips. Thomas read it again, aloud, gently. My soul will be satisfied, as with the richest of foods. He glanced at the small tin of honey beside the cups. He smiled. Faith, he thought, isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's honey in your tea, a remembered verse, a familiar creak of the floorboard. He poured the tea slowly and stirred in just enough honey to taste. Then he sat and sipped and closed his eyes. It wasn't church, but it was communion. He remembered how Jesus had once made breakfast for his disciples, fish on a charcoal fire by the sea. And Thomas thought, if the Son of God could serve breakfast, then surely his presence could be here now, in a kitchen filled with steam and memory. He didn't need to wait for Sunday to feel close to God, because God had already set his table. Right here, among tea leaves and psalms. Take a deep breath. Let his goodness steep slowly in your heart. Bedtime takeaway. God meets you in the quiet corners of daily life. You don't need a crowd, only a cup and a heart willing to listen. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. Isaiah 46:4. The day was beginning to lean toward evening. The light had shifted, not fully gone, but softened, golden and slow. Thomas stepped out onto the back porch, his favorite rocking chair creaking gently beneath him. The air smelled of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, the cardinal sang not loud, but clear, as if remembering something too beautiful to keep inside. He rocked slowly, the old boards beneath him shifting in rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. A quiet lullaby for the soul. The world did not need his strength tonight. It didn't need his answers. It only asked that he be still. There had been many evenings like this in his life, but he was only now beginning to notice them. Back then, his mind was too full. Tasks, deadlines, things to fix, people to protect. But now there was space. To see, to listen, to let go. The trees beyond the porch were tall and steady, like old friends who didn't need to say much to make you feel safe. And above them, the sky stretched wide and quiet, painted in strokes of lavender and ash. He remembered a line from an old hymn Mary used to hum. "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide." He rocked slower, the chair groaning softly like a sleeping child. "Lord," he thought, "I don't have many words left tonight. But I'm here. I'm still here." And in the hush of dusk, he felt a tenderness brush against him. Not wind, not thought, but presence. The God who made him, who carried him, even now in old age and gray hair. Still faithful, still near. Thomas closed his eyes, not from weariness, but from peace. Take a deep breath. Let the hush of evening draw you into stillness. Bedtime takeaway. God carries you, not just when you are strong, but especially when you are quiet, old, and resting. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. Night had come, soft and gentle like a lullaby wrapped in velvet. Thomas moved slowly through the house, turning off the lamps one by one. The quiet grew deeper with each click. Not a lonely quiet, but a comforting one, like the hush between heartbeats when you know you're safe. He folded the last dish towel, ran warm water over his hands, and finally made his way to the bedroom. The bed creaked as he sat, the same bed he had shared with Mary. Now half empty, but not cold. He pulled the worn quilt over his legs. Mary had stitched it years ago, square by square. Each patch told a story, a picnic, a birthday, a snowfall. He traced one with his finger, a faded square of yellow, soft as butter. That had been their first anniversary fabric. Thomas breathed in deeply and let out a slow sigh. The room was dim now, just the glow from the little lamp on the nightstand and the steady pulse of crickets outside the window. He turned slightly and reached for the small wooden cross resting beside the lamp. He didn't need to say much. "Thank you," he whispered. "That was enough. Thank you for the years. Thank you for the moments. Thank you for the quiet in between." He leaned back into the pillow, the quilt wrapped around him like wing, not just Mary's, but God's. The kind of covering that doesn't wear out, that remembers every ache, that doesn't ask for strength, only surrender. As his eyes grew heavy, he thought of all the nights he had spent afraid, nights filled with worry, regret, and wondering, nights when he felt like no one was listening. But now, he wasn't trying to be brave and he wasn't trying to be wise. He was simply resting, under wings that never left him, covered, known, held. Take a deep breath. Let his blanket of mercy draw around you. Bedtime takeaway. You are not forgotten. You are tucked safely under the wings of God, even now. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Joel 2:28. Sleep came slowly, like mist settling over a field. Thomas lay still beneath the quilt, his breathing steady. The room quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves beyond the window. And then, somewhere between the last conscious thought and the first pull of dream, he felt it. A gentle shift, like stepping into a memory, but softer, lighter. He was walking again, but not in pain. His legs were strong, steady. The air around him was warm, kissed with golden light. Trees stretched above like cathedrals, their leaves whispering secrets from heaven. And up ahead, Mary, not aged, not frail but radiant the way she looked on their wedding day. Her eyes held the same kindness. Her hands were outstretched. She didn't speak, but somehow he understood. It's peace. There was no fear here, no time. Just the sense that everything, every ache, every loss, every question had somehow been folded into joy. He turned and saw others, familiar faces, old friends, some he hadn't seen in decades. They were laughing gently, hands resting on each other's shoulders, eyes lifted towards something he couldn't yet see. And then a presence. He didn't see a face, but he knew. Jesus. There was no need for introduction. It was like recognizing the one you've always known but never fully seen. And Thomas fell to his knees, not because he had to, but because everything in him wanted to. Jesus knelt too and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. And in that touch, years melted, sorrows stilled. Love poured in like light through stained glass. No words, just knowing. And then, softly, Thomas began to wake. The quilt was still over him. The room was still dark. But something had changed. The ache was still in his bone, but it no longer felt heavy, because now he had glimpsed something real. Not a fantasy, not a dream, but a promise. Take a deep breath. Let hope enter the quiet spaces of your soul. Bedtime takeaway. Even in sleep, God draws near. He gives rest to the weary, and sometimes even dreams to the old. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Lamentations 3:22-23. The sun rose slowly, as if it knew Thomas was still waking from something holy. Its light touched the curtains gently, not rushing him, just waiting. Thomas blinked and turned his head on the pillow. The dream still lingered, not in full clarity, but in feeling, like the scent of rain long after the storm has passed. He lay there for a while, no hurry, no tasks, just breath and warmth and the memory of God's touch. Eventually he sat up. The old familiar aches reminded him he was still in this world, but he smiled. That was okay, because this world, too, was held by God. He put on his slippers, shuffled into the kitchen, and filled the kettle with water. As it began to heat, he stood quietly, leaning on the counter, eyes still soft from sleep. Outside, birds were already busy singing their ordinary songs as if the world had never been broken. He loved that, how creation kept singing. Even when life felt confusing, or even when prayers felt unanswered, even when all you had was silence. He took his tea out to the porch again. The bench was damp, but the chair was dry, waiting like an old friend. He sat down slowly, wrapped in a shawl, and breathed in the morning. There were no big plans today, no great accomplishments waiting, only time and grace. Grace for his slowness, grace for his questions, grace for simply being. He looked down at his hands, spotted, worn, beautiful in their own way. He remembered all they had carried. And he whispered, "Still here, Lord, still yours." It was enough, because God's love hadn't changed overnight. It hadn't grown tired. It hadn't forgotten him. It hadn't measured his usefulness before choosing to stay. It was new again, just like this day. Take a deep breath. Let morning wrap around you without expectation. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to prove anything today. God's compassion meets you just as you are. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. There was an old wooden box on the shelf in Thomas's living room, worn smooth from years of being opened, then closed again. Inside it were letters, most of them unsent. He had written them at different points in his life. To his children, to Mary after she passed, to friends he hadn't seen in decades. Sometimes he would read them again, not to stir regret, but to remember who he had been when he wrote them. One afternoon, as the clouds moved slowly across the sunlit sky, Thomas opened the box again. His fingers gently unfolded a yellowing envelope addressed, in his own handwriting, "To God when I don't know what else to do." He didn't remember writing it, but the words inside, they felt familiar. He read slowly, "Dear God, I don't understand why some things happen. I try to trust you, but it's hard some days. Please help me rest. Even when my heart feels like a clenched fist, I want to let go. Please hold what I can't anymore." There were tear stains on the paper. He didn't remember which season this had come from. Grief, loneliness, a moment of fear. But it didn't matter, because the letter no longer felt like a cry of despair. It felt like worship. Honest, unpolished, real. He folded it gently as if cradling something sacred and returned it to the box. Maybe it had never needed to be mailed. Maybe God had read it the moment it was written. Maybe he had held those tears before Thomas even let them fall. He looked out the window. The sky had cleared, not entirely, but enough. And he whispered the same prayer again, not from panic this time, but from peace. Hold what I can't anymore. Take a deep breath. Let the weight fall from your shoulders. Bedtime takeaway. Even the prayers you never speak aloud, God hears them and he carries them close to his heart. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Proverbs 17:17. Late one afternoon, just as the wind began to pick up and the trees whispered in the language of dusk, Thomas heard a knock at the door. It wasn't hurried, just a soft, patient rhythm, like someone knocking more for presence than urgency. He opened the door slowly, and there stood Jonah. Jonah was the young man who delivered groceries from the village market once a week. In his early 30s, kind-eyed, often quiet, he had once offered to carry Thomas's bags inside. And after that, they started to talk. Just little things: the weather, tomatoes, the price of apples. But over time, silence became a friend between them. "I brought by the bread you like," Jonah said, holding up a small paper bag. "The lady at the bakery said this batch was softer." Thomas nodded and stepped aside. "Come in for a moment." Jonah hesitated, then smiled. "Sure?" They sat at the table without much to say. Thomas poured 2 cups of tea. The kettle had just finished singing. The room was filled with quiet again, not the lonely kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind that wrapped around you like an old quilt. The kind that said, "You don't need to say anything to be seen." Jonah finally spoke, voice low. "My dad's not doing so well. They think it's time to call the family in." Thomas looked into his cup. Then, without thinking, he reached across the table and placed his old hand gently over Jonah's. It was a simple gesture, no sermon, no advice, just presence. And that was what Jonah needed most. They sat like that for a while. The tea grew cold, but neither of them minded. Thomas knew now that sometimes the holiest thing you can offer is silence. The kind that listens. The kind that doesn't try to fix. The kind that simply stays. When Jonah finally stood to leave, he placed the bread on the counter and looked at Thomas. "Thank you," he said softly. Thomas only nodded. As the door closed, he looked out through the window. The sky was the color of ash and lavender again. He whispered, "Lord, thank you for showing up, even in the quiet." Take a deep breath. Let the silence between you and God become safe. Bedtime takeaway. Love doesn't always come with word. Sometimes God sends someone just to sit beside you, and that's enough. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. That evening, after Jonah had gone and the house had grown quiet again, Thomas lit a small candle. He didn't really need it. The overhead lamp worked just fine, but there was something about the flicker, gentle, warm, alive, that made the room feel softer, sacred. He placed it on the windowsill. Years ago, Mary used to light a candle whenever one of the children was traveling home. She called it her waiting light. "It's not so they can see the house," she'd say. "It's so I remember to watch and pray." He smiled at the memory. So many candles. So many nights spent looking out the window, hoping for the shape of headlights. Now, the children had their own homes, their own windows, and he was the one being watched over. The candle flickered gently. It wasn't loud or impressive, it just stayed lit. A quiet defiance against the dark. Thomas thought of all the years he had spent trying to keep everything burning, holding it all together for his family, his church, his work. And now, here he was. Just one flame, but it was enough. He stood at the window, hand resting on the cool sill, and looked out into the night. No one was expected. No footsteps coming up the path. No headlights turning the bend. And yet, he lit the candle anyway. Not to welcome someone, but to say, "I'm still hoping, I'm still watching. I still believe light is stronger than night." He whispered, "Lord, keep this little flame alive in me, even when I'm tired, even when I don't feel much. Let me burn gently for you." And the candle answered, with nothing more than quiet steadiness. Take a deep breath. Watch the flame in your heart, still dancing. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need to shine brightly to matter. Even the smallest flame keeps the darkness from winning. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Galatians 6:9. The next morning was overcast again. The air held a hint of coming rain. Thomas sat quietly at the table, fingers wrapped around a mug that had grown cool. He glanced toward the window where the old garden sat. It hadn't been touched in months. Once, it had been Mary's joy. Tomatoes in neat rows, herbs lining the edge, wildflowers woven between vegetables like little bursts of praise. But now it was overgrown, still beautiful, in a tired sort of way. After breakfast, he wrapped a scarf around his neck, pulled on his boots, and stepped out the back door. The garden gate creaked like a familiar voice calling his name. He knelt slowly, carefully, and ran his hand across the earth. It was soft, not dead, just waiting. Thomas pulled up a few weeds, not in a rush, just one at a time. He didn't plan to fix the whole garden that day, but he felt something good in the smallness of the act. A quiet kind of faith, not loud, not certain, but real. He remembered the year he and Mary had planted too early when frost came back one last time and ruined their young sprouts. They had cried, but they had also replanted, because hope always returns with the soil. As he worked, a memory floated through. Mary kneeling in the dirt, brushing her hands together and saying, Even if no one sees it, something is always growing. He smiled. She had been right. Even now, after all these years, even in his old age, something was still growing. Patience, gratitude, gentleness. Not in rows, not in perfect order, but in him. He paused, resting his elbows on his knees, breathing in the scent of earth and fallen leaves. It didn't matter that he was slow. It didn't matter that the weeds would return tomorrow. It mattered that he had knelt, that he had shown up to the soil again, because God wasn't asking him for success, just faithfulness. Take a deep breath. Feel the seed of grace still growing in you. Bedtime takeaway. Even if no one sees it, something sacred is growing in you. God sees every small act of faith, and he remembers. Jesus said, "And come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. The morning light came softly through the kitchen window. Thomas moved through his daily routine with a calmness that surprised him. The sound of the kettle humming, the gentle clink of spoon against cup, the slow turning of pages in his well-worn Bible. He didn't rush anymore. Each small task held a quiet blessing. Making the bed, filling the bird feeder, sitting down to read a verse or two. They were simple acts, but in their simplicity he found rest. The weariness he once carried felt lighter now, not gone but gentled, held tenderly by a love that whispered, "You don't have to be strong. You only have to be here." Thomas sat by the window, watching as a pair of sparrows flitted about. One landed on the feeder. The other waited patiently nearby. There was peace in their waiting, a sacred stillness that seemed to echo the invitation of Jesus himself. "Come to me," he said, "now rest in my presence. No demands, no judgments, only rest." Thomas closed his eyes and let a slow breath escape. Rest, that was the gift he needed most. Tonight, tomorrow, and always. Take a deep breath. Let Jesus' invitation wrap you in gentle peace. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. Come as you are and find rest in him. Evening and morning and at noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. Psalm 55:17. The day was coming to an end, soft shadows stretching across the walls. Thomas sat once more on his porch, the rocking chair moving gently beneath him. The sky was a canvas of deep purples and soft pinks, the sun dipping low. He felt the familiar ache in his joints, the quiet pull of years. But tonight, he chose to focus not on what was lost, but on what remained. A prayer rose in his heart, not loud, but steady like the steady beat of wings in flight. Thank you, Lord, for this day, for the breath, for the quiet, for the moments I can still see your hand. He thought of all the prayers he had whispered over the years, the tears, the laughter, the waiting. And in this last light, he knew God had heard everyone, every sigh, every cry, every silent plea. Thomas leaned back, letting the evening wrap around him like a familiar shawl. He closed his eyes and rested, not just in sleep, but in faith, in the gentle knowing that no matter how the day ends, his prayers rise still, like soft incense rising to a God who listens, a God who loves, a God who is always near. Take a deep breath. Let your heart settle in his presence tonight. Bedtime takeaway. No matter the hour, your prayers reach God. He listens. He cares. You are never alone. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. The night had deepened into stillness, and Thomas's breathing was slow and even. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly, like distant promises. And somewhere, the first whispers of dawn began to stir. He did not know what the new day would bring, but he knew deep in his soul that God's mercies were waiting. Fresh, unchanged, tender. The world may grow tired, the heart may ache, but God's compassion is new every morning. Thomas pictured a sunrise, soft and golden, creeping gently over the hills near his home, like a quiet hand reaching out to touch the earth. He smiled, knowing that no matter how dark the night feels, morning is always coming. And with it hope. He thought of the days when he felt invisible, when the world seemed too loud, too fast, too uncertain, and how God met him in those moments, not with thunder, not with lightning, but with steady faithfulness. He whispered softly, "Great is your faithfulness, Lord. Great is your faithfulness." And with that, he let sleep carry him gently forward. Take a deep breath. Let the quiet promise of morning fill you with hope. Bedtime takeaway. God's mercy is new every day, no matter your weariness. His faithfulness will carry you through. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. The hours before dawn held a sacred hush. The world seemed to pause, caught between night and morning, between silence and song. Thomas lay awake, feeling the gentle rhythm of his own heart, slow and steady. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees, a lullaby for the waiting. He thought of the days when life felt chaotic, when his mind raced like a river swollen after rain. But here, in this stillness, he found a different rhythm, a quiet peace that didn't need explanation. He breathed deeply, letting go of the worries that clung like shadows. He remembered the words he had read so many times, now like a soft melody in his soul. Be still and know that I am God. Not just a command, but an invitation. To rest, to trust, to surrender. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the presence of God enfolding him like a gentle blanket. He was not alone. He was deeply known. He was profoundly loved. In the stillness before the dawn, he found rest. Take a deep breath. Settle into the quiet presence of God. Bedtime takeaway. In the stillness, God is near. Be gentle with yourself and rest in his peace. Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18. The sun was barely a whisper on the horizon as Thomas sat quietly by the window. His hands folded loosely in his lap, fingers tracing the soft fabric of his worn sweater. Prayer for him was no longer a hurried list of requests or frantic pleadings. It had become a gentle rhythm, like breathing, a quiet conversation with the one who held his heart. Some days, his prayers were simple, a thank you whispered in the morning light, a hope carried softly on a sigh. Other days, they were silent, more felt than spoken, prayers lifted on the wings of trust. He thought of the Apostle Paul's words, a gentle reminder to rejoice always, to pray continually. It sounded impossible at times, but Thomas found it was more about presence than perfection, to keep his heart tuned to God, even in the smallest moments. To lift gratitude as a quiet song, to carry hope in the spaces between breaths. As the light grew stronger outside, Thomas felt a warmth rising within him, a slow, steady peace. He smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for every breath, every prayer, every moment of grace." Take a deep breath. Feel your heart join the quiet rhythm of prayer. Bedtime takeaway prayer is not about words alone. It's a gentle turning toward God, a constant loving presence. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. The sun was setting slowly, casting a warm glow through the window of Thomas's sitting room. In the corner sat his favorite chair, the one that had molded to the shape of his body over the years. It was old and creaky, but it held him like a faithful friend. Every evening, after the day's quiet rituals, he would settle there, letting the world soften around him. The chair didn't ask for anything. It didn't expect grand stories or loud laughter. It simply held space, a resting place for tired bones and weary hearts. Thomas sank into it now, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. The aches of the day pressed gently against him, but he let them rest there like old companions. He thought of Jesus' invitation, so tender, so inviting to come with all his burdens, not to pretend to be strong, not to hide the weariness, but to simply come and receive rest. The chair creaked softly as he rocked, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the beat of his heart. He let go of all the weight he had carried, the worries, the regrets, the fears. Here, in this old chair, he was safe. He was loved. He was home. Take a deep breath. Let yourself rest in the comfort God offers you tonight. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. Jesus invites you to rest, and he will hold you gently. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. John 14:27. The night wrapped the world in quiet softness. Thomas lay beneath his patchwork quilt, the familiar weight settling over him like a warm embrace. Outside, the stars blinked slowly, ancient and steady, a gentle reminder of God's unchanging presence. His thoughts drifted like feathers, light and unburdened. No pressing questions, no urgent needs. Only the soft whisper of peace, a peace not of this world, but a gift freely given. He thought of Jesus' words, "Peace I leave with you." Not peace tied to circumstance, not peace waiting on tomorrow, but a deep, abiding peace to hold him now. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the quiet sink into every corner of his soul. He breathed slowly, feeling the night's gentle whisper fill the spaces where fear and worry had once lived. He was safe. He was loved. He was resting in the arms of a God who never sleeps. And in that stillness, he found the truest rest of all. Take a deep breath. Let the peace of Christ settle gently on your heart tonight. Bedtime takeaway. God's peace is not like the world's. It is calm, steady, and ever present, ready to hold you through the night.